Good afternoon, everybody. This is Don again, and it is time for episode 57 of Practical Reality. It's a Tuesday afternoon, a little after 3 p.m. The sun is out. It's maybe 45, 48 degrees, something like that. Not quite warm enough to sit in my chair, but I am in the park. It's beautiful out. There's no leaves on the trees yet, but the grass is green, which I'm kind of surprised to see. It greened up really fast. We have had some rain lately, and now today the sun is out and shining brightly. So the trend is in the right direction. I'll tell you, that was one cold winter. I am glad that one is over, that's for sure. So in episode 56, I discussed the issue of discipline versus capacity. And I defined capacity in simple terms, basically as how much you can take. How much crap the world throws at you before you break down, and what happens when the breakdown occurs. Then I discussed ways that you can deal with capacity issues to make yourself more able to control your internal environment, which is the objective of every one of my videos. A couple of days after I made that video, I saw another video from a different woman talking about how healing your wounded inner child is so important. Now, I've dealt with inner child issues before in another video a while back, but this woman had a different viewpoint. And listening to her video made me start to think that the inner child could be a major contributor to your lack of capacity and the breakdown of your discipline. And I'll put a link to that video below this one. So let me explain exactly what I mean. This woman starts off her video by asking questions which in my mind are issues of capacity, such as, do you tend to take things personally? Do you isolate when you're stressed out? Now, if you don't do these things, we probably all know someone who does. And she says the reason you do these things, is because of a wounded inner child. And the inner child feels wounded because of what she calls unresolved trauma. She then goes on to define this unresolved trauma as feelings of abandonment, rejection, and unworthiness. And I think most of us can identify with that. I know I certainly can. And she goes on to make the very valid point that even though you had these feelings as a child, you're far removed from being a child now, so why, you may ask, do those feelings still persist? The next point she made really hits home with me. The reason that you, as an adult, still feel the wounded inner child is because you have never learned to love yourself. You can't deal with the childhood trauma because you don't have any self-love to replace it with. Why is that? As she explains, you may never have had a good role model of self-love in your life. My parents, although I love them deeply, were very different people. And I sometimes wonder how they stayed together married for 30 years or whatever it was. My father was a stern, distant man. He was the oldest of 10 children. He didn't sleep in his own bed except when he was an infant. And he was charged with the responsibility of helping raise his brothers at an early age because his father became ill and really couldn't perform the physical tasks necessary to be a dad and raise his children. So my father never had the chance to grow up and be a kid and experience life with any sort of freedom that a teenager, that we would normally consider that a teenager has or a teenager needs. And my mom was a happy-go-lucky woman, just like the Cyndi Lauper song. She just wanted to have fun. But that was a very difficult thing to do while being married to my father, I'll tell you that much. And I honestly don't think that they ever gave any thought whatsoever to the emotional development of their children. They were just trying to do the best they could to raise kids in the only way they knew how, which, of course, we all know there is no manual for raising children, and many people make a lot of mistakes that they don't realize that they make. My father's idea of discipline back in the late 60s and early 70s would today be labeled child abuse. There's just no doubt about it. When my mother used to say to me, wait till your father gets home, that would strike genuine fear into me. My father's favorite form of discipline was to take the belt around his waist and basically whip my ass with it until he felt I had enough, until he felt I learned my lesson. And of course, the question is, what was the lesson? And really, there was no lesson. I don't know whether my father was just doing it to get out his anger. Did he think he was teaching me something by whipping me with that belt? I really don't know. But I can recall two incidents in particular. The first was when my brother and I were playing in the rec room on a Saturday morning. And I was probably like 10 and he was like 6. And we were crawling on our hands and knees, chasing each other around the room, in the rec room. And we went behind one of the recliners. And behind one of that recliner was a floor-to-ceiling lamp that had like suction cups on either end to hold it in place. And there were 3 globes on it, that you could point in different directions. And in the course of crawling quickly around that lamp, one of us, I don't know whether it was myself or my brother, hit it, and it fell over and broke one of the globes. And I can recall it so clearly. The 2 of us just froze right in place because we knew we were going to get in trouble. And I can remember hearing my father get out of bed and somebody screaming like, "What the hell was that?" And he just came down the stairs, down 2 flights of stairs with a belt in his hand. He had his boxer shorts on and the belt in his hand, and he just started like flailing away, just like whipping the 2 of us. And I can't even tell you why every image, every second of that incident is burned into my brain like it happened yesterday, but it is. The second incident was when we were all packing for a family vacation. I think we were going to Cape Cod. My younger brother and I had been going downtown with some of our friends, which was like a 10 to 15 minute walk, to the local A&P and stealing packs of gum. I don't recall how many packs of gum we had accumulated, but my younger brother had decided to take some of it with him on the vacation, and he had it in like a cigar box that he was putting in his suitcase. And my mother found it, and I guess it didn't take too long to figure out that we had stolen that gum, and that really set my father off. He basically took my brother into his room and whipped his ass with that belt, and then he took the cigar box and walked across the street to the woods and basically threw it so all the gum went flying out of the cigar box. And I remember my brother screaming and crying. It was really a horrible incident. And it's funny, when we got back from vacation, the gum was still there across the street. I mean, we went back and just picked it up and recovered it all, and like nothing happened. But that was still something that I can still picture so clearly that my father did to us, and he thought he was doing something good for us. I hope that's what he thought. I really don't know. But the whole point is, those incidents are burned into my brain with such clarity. And there are other things that happen as well, which the third incident I'm going to describe, I said I was going to describe 2 incidents, but there's actually a third one that happened when I was older, okay, which I think is actually more consequential. I was 17 years old, and my father had caught me using marijuana a couple of times. And the first time or the second time he did it, he took away my tickets to go see Aerosmith and Ted Nugent at the Meadowlands Arena, or the Giant Stadium. And that was 1978, and that concert turned out to be like historic. I think they took parts of it. Both Aerosmith and Ted Nugent took parts of it and put it on live albums. So I was kind of bummed out that I had missed that. But then the next time he caught me with it, we were again in the rec room, and he punched me in the face. Pretty good shot he landed on me, because I went flying backwards and hit a couch, knocked the couch over, and then ended up like rolling off the top of the couch onto the floor behind it. And then he stepped over the couch and spit in my face and said, "Ugh, I spit in your face," like he was just trying to be as disrespectful as he possibly could. And I can still picture clearly the look of like disgust on his face and just revulsion that he felt. The fact that his son was using drugs just like so horrified him, and he felt so disrespected. And I can't possibly, tell you what was going on in his mind. I can only interpret from the look he had on his face that that's how he felt. And of course, I was using drugs, but I was never hooked on anything. I used other drugs as well in my earlier years. And I never had a drug problem. I never had an accident because of drugs. I never cost my father any money because of drugs. It was just something I was doing, an experimentation. And I don't think he should have been that concerned about it. But at the same time, his attitude was that I was, at least the way I can interpret it, was that I was disrespecting him so badly by doing these drugs that he felt like he had to retaliate. And these are just a few incidents of the many times my father struck me and my younger brother with the belt. And of course, this kind of abuse manifested itself in me as my own bad temper. And when my temper used to flare up, I remember one incident in particular when I kicked my bedroom door and I left like a little indentation in the bedroom door. I don't know, it was kind of a wooden door, a thin wooden door that was like not, plywood. It was just like some kind of particle wood. So when you kicked it, it just like knocked out a few pieces and left an indentation in the door. And my father looked at me and said, "Kid, you're going to have a hard life," with that sort of like hatred in his eyes. And then, of course, in his calmer and more friendly moments, he used to say things to me like, "Don, I think you're my smartest son." But he was never able to just be my friend. He always had to be my dad. And as he got older, his relationships, even with his own brothers, became frayed. The best way to explain that is in 1979, he got 2 season tickets to the Giants. The Giants Stadium opened in 1976, and he was on the waiting list for 3 years, and he finally got the tickets. And I remember in the beginning, he would go with one of his brothers. He had 7 brothers, and they would go to the Giants games. But after several years, he would hold on to the tickets and hardly ever use them, and he ended up starting to give them to my younger brother and myself. So my younger brother and myself, we went to loads of Giants games. I probably went to 100 of them, and some of them were pretty memorable, and they were great games. But he didn't really hang out with his brothers anymore. They used to actually also get together and play cards, like once a month or something like that on a Friday night. Sometimes it would be at our house. Sometimes it would be at, one of the other brothers' houses. But that sort of habit dissipated and just faded away as well. He just isolated himself after a while. And as I grew older, the unresolved conflict within myself manifested itself in bad ways as well. I became overly strict with my children and I spanked them. Now, I don't think I ever spanked them as bad as my father spanked me, but I did spank them and I admit it, and I know I was wrong. And I felt terrible every time I did it. And then in 2002, I had what the social workers would call a manic episode, which in general, like the layman's terms, is called a nervous breakdown. And the depression that resulted after that incident lasted for 6 whole years. And it wasn't until I started seeing a therapist in 2009 that I came to grips with everything that had happened to me. And it made me realize that everything that I was doing was me trying to make myself worthy in my father's eyes. And it was impossible. And I mean, the man had died in 2002 as well. That was also part of the chain of events that precipitated my decline into depression. Because when my father died, he had sort of reformed his ways and was being sort of a lifeline to me at that point in my life, after my nervous breakdown caused me to be isolated from my own family. And he was helping me and counseling me and trying to help me, stand by me and this kind of thing. And then when he died late 2002, that was also another one of the chain of events that precipitated my real drop into severe depression. And I never really had the chance to ask my father this question because I was never, sort of the deep thinker that I am now. But I'm sure that one of the reasons that my father found it impossible to just be my friend, and he felt like he had to be my father all the time, he may have had the same feelings of isolation and anger that had festered for years inside of him and manifested in the way he disciplined his own children. So maybe there is room there for me to forgive him. And I have forgiven him now after such a long period of time. But, back then, when I was isolating myself and sinking into just an incredible state of depression, I hadn't thought of any of this. And my world just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So what was I left with? I was left with feelings of unworthiness and never knowing whether or not I was good enough in my father's eyes. And I finally had to let go of all of that and realize that I was now the adult, and the inner child could not be allowed to rule the way I felt myself. So through that therapy, I was able to forgive myself for everything I had done and began my spiritual journey of growth. And I am at the point now where I know myself, and I do love myself, and I like the person that I see when I look in the mirror. But it was not an easy road to get there. And this woman's video made me realize that the inner child had a huge influence over my capacity and how much I could take. And even after all this work that I've done for 15 years, that inner child is still there. And there is still that core, that little nugget of negative anger that my father instilled in me when I was a teenager that still lives inside of me and still finds ways to express itself, sometimes in inappropriate ways. Nowhere as near as violent as it used to be, but still inappropriate ways at times. And it is still no longer proper for me to blame my father for that. No longer. It's way past that time. It is purely my responsibility, and I cannot call myself an adult until I fully accept that responsibility. So the questions I have for you then are, have you reconciled with your own inner child? Have you ever thought about how your inner child may be influencing your capacity to deal with the world? Do you think that reconciling with your inner child and accepting full responsibility as an adult would benefit you in some way? If those questions are difficult for you to answer, then I am with you and I empathize with you. It is clear that there is a lot of anger and cruelty in the world, and that your capacity can get strained on a daily basis, breaking down the discipline that you strive so hard for. And the inner child may be the presence in your psyche that criticizes you and makes you feel weak and lazy for not being able to maintain your discipline. So reconciling those feelings with your inner child could be a huge step forward for you in your ability to expand your capacity, maintain your discipline, and gain internal control. And live your life in the present moment, feeling fulfilled and joyful and grateful. And isn't that what we all want? That is my daily journey. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that I have seen results, and I wish the same results for everyone. And this channel is actually part of that testimony that may be, who knows, my father in some small way may have played some role in why I do this channel. I'm glad that you made it, and I hope that you will stay in touch with me, and I hope you will learn the skills that I have talked about here, that I wish that everyone would master: the ability to reconcile with your inner child and learn to gain that internal control of your environment that is so necessary to be peaceful, fulfilled, grateful, and joyful. Thank you for your time today. This is Don signing off of episode 57 of Practical Reality. Have yourself a great day. Peace, happiness, and prosperity to you all. Like, comment, and subscribe, of course.